What's up, guys? Welcome back to the continuous coverage of the World Cup. We are right now in round number 4 and these matches are getting extremely tense. In this video, we will be looking at the match between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and Wojtaszek Radoslaw. He's a grandmaster from Poland, number 2 in Poland right now. Very strong grandmaster. And let's see what happened in their match. Radoslaw started with the white pieces in the first game and he decided to go for the Catalan with g3, d5, bishop to g2. Now, of course, black played the move bishop to e7. Nevertheless, a lot of options are available for black. They can go bishop to b4, they can take on c4 if they want a lot of options. Bishop to e7, nevertheless, is considered to be probably the most solid option. And we know in these mini matches with the black pieces, you don't want to push the envelope too much. You want to play very conservative chess. Don't take too many risks because if you lose one game, it's going to be so difficult to bounce back, even with the white pieces. Bishop to e7, knight to f3, short castle, a5. A very intriguing move, taking more space on the queen side. Queen to c2, immediately defending the pawn on c4. Now, every time you're going to take on c4, I'm going to be able to take back with a queen, and you will not have the chance to be a pawn up as black. c6, knight to d2, b6, e4. White immediately breaks in the center. Try to take advantage of the fact that this bishop has not gotten on this diagonal yet control this central e4 square. Bishop to b7, rook to d1, knight to a6, e5. So this setup by black allows white to gain some space. The idea is that, okay, you're going to say, white, you can push your pawns as much as you want. You can take as much space as you want, but then I will have a lot of targets in the position because you have overextended. You pushed your pawns a bit too much. And let's see if that's exactly the case. This is the battle between the dynamic options that white gets by pushing these pawns like this and getting so much space, and the more strategic options that black gets whenever it has this overextended structure to attack. Knight to d7, c takes d5, knight to b4, queen to b1, c takes d5, knight to f1. The knight is either going to h2 and then g4 or potentially to e3. Bishop to a6, knight to e3, rook to c8, a3. Also the knight on e3 nicely covers the c2 square, otherwise this knight would land on c2 and that would be very problematic for white. Knight to c6, b3, b5, h4, taking more space on the king side, trying to go for the checkmate or at least try to soften up black's position on the king side. b4, a4, bishop to e2, rook to d2, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, f6. And Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, definitely knows when the time is right to open up the position. And that is exactly what he's doing right now. He does not want to allow white to, for example, retreat with the move bishop to g2 and then reinforce the center with the move f4. Doesn't want to create this diamond shape structure with this spear on e5. So immediately he goes for this f6, attacking this pawn on e5. This is crucial. You're asking white, okay, you need to make a decision. What are you going to do? Are you going to take on f6? No. Wojtaszek says, I'm going to counter with bishop to g4, targeting this pawn on e6. f5, knight takes f5, a big piece sacrifice, of course. You can also, if you want, for example, play the move bishop to f3 back, but after f4, you would be in severe danger as white. So after bishop to g4, f5, knight takes f5, big piece sacrifice by Radoslaw Wojtaszek. E takes f5, Magnus has to accept the piece and immediately give it back. Well, why would you ask? Why not just simply the move h6? h6 is a perfectly fine move. Unfortunately, I'm going to be able to go bishop to e6, then you're going to go king to h8, then I'm going to pick up another pawn, and now with the support of the bishop on b2, a very nice placement on the long diagonal, I'm going to drop back with the bishop, and then at the right moment, I'm going to start pushing my pawns. 3 central pawns like this are going to spell trouble for black. So he decided, instead of h6, of course, a normal move, that would be to take on h4, return the favor as soon as possible and get the dynamic play in the position. G takes f4, queen takes h4, You want to take another piece? Sure, yeah, go for another piece, but you're going to get checkmated after knight to d4. Look at this. This rook is having a beautiful attacking sequence on the f5. This rook is ready to go on c3. And the knight, of course, is ready to go to f3 and deliver the checkmate. This one is a really bad news for white. So you cannot afford taking another piece. He played bishop to e6, king to h8, queen to d3, knight takes e5. Hey, you don't want to take my piece on d7? I'll give it to you. I'll force you to take my piece. I'm going to sacrifice another knight on e5, d takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes d5, knight to f3, queen takes f3, a big moment, rook takes f3, bishop takes e8, rook to f8, a bishop to b7. Now we have two bishops, a rook for a queen and a pawn. That seems like it's a very good imbalance for white, because we know the bishops, two bishops especially, and a rook are extremely powerful against the queen. Nevertheless, what the queen needs in this type of material imbalanced positions are targets. And black definitely has a lot of targets in the position for his queen. Also, what the queen needs is a weak king to attack. And white definitely has a weak king. So given all that, putting that into context, it seems like black is doing perfectly fine, despite the fact that from a material perspective, white should have the advantage. Rook to a2, queen to f7, targeting that bishop. Queen takes b3, so we're picking up another pawn, bishop to e3, rook to d8, and at this point, Magnus decides to offer a draw. Remember, this is the first game of their mini match. They're playing two games, and if it's 1-1, then they go into tie breaks. He decides right now, okay, I'm done with this game. It looks too dicey, too much risk involved playing against these two bishops and the rook, so I'm just going to offer a draw. The objective assessment seems to be in black's favor, and nevertheless, from a practical perspective, this seemed like the right decision at the time. So this one was the first game of their mini match. Let's see what happened in the second game, where Magnus has the white pieces. So we're going to start from the beginning. White opens up with the move e4, c5, knight to f3, d6, bishop to b5, knight to d7, d4. C takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to f6, castle. Do you want to take the pawn on e4? Probably not, because after rook to e1, you're going to be in deep danger. White just simply has too much play at that point, too much activity on the central files. It seems like knight takes e4 is just a bad move. The e4 pawn is a poison pawn. You cannot touch that. So he decides to go a6, target the bishop on b5, bishop to a4, keeping up this pin on the knight on d7, very important pin. e6, c4. Now I'm going to take more space and try to create a Marozzi bind type of structure with these pawns on e4 and c4, taking a lot of space from black. The bishop to e7, knight to c3, castle, queen to e2. Now white seems to be developing just in a very natural way. I'm going to put the rook either to d1 or to e1, and at the right moment I'm going to launch an attack on the king side. That is white's main plan right now. Attack on the king side, something along the lines of f4, g4, and then g5 at the right moment. Let's see what happened. Queen to c7, f4, knight to b6, bishop to b3, defending this pawn on c4, and now black decides to open up the position and change dramatically the structure with the move e5. Now this gives me a very nice outpost for my knight on d5, but at the same time it challenges these overextended pawns, and this is exactly the strategical reason behind black's last move e5. Let's see what happened. Knight to f5, bishop takes f5, e takes f5, rook to e8, putting the rook on this about to be open file, g4, and Magnus immediately launches into the attack. g4, g5, try to displace the knight on f6. This is one of the most important pieces in black's position because it's the defender, the main defender around the black king. And if you're going to be able to displace that and then open up the position with g5, g6, blast open the position, well, that could spell trouble for black. Let's see what happened. E takes f4, bishop takes f4, bishop to f8, attacking the queen. You have to move the queen away, put it on the light square so that it controls a lot of important avenues for your pieces. Also supports the move g5, g6, the break that white is definitely dreaming of at this point. Knight takes c4, g5, knight to h5, knight to d5, queen to c5, king to h1, b5, g6. White is breaking through at this point. Rook to b8, ready to give the checkmate. Rook to d1, defending the knight on d5 and freeing up the queen from the defense of the knight on d5. Knight takes f4. Finally, we're taking one of white's attackers, that bishop on f4. Nevertheless, that attacker on f4, it doesn't seem like it was doing that much damage. So it seemed like a good trade for black. Rook takes f4, rook to e5, rook to h4, rook takes f5. And at this point, Magnus played this timid move, bishop to c2, a bit too slow, and he missed a very big resource for black. An easy way to finish the game would have been rook takes h7. This seems to be the most straightforward way. You're just getting closer to the king and ready to give the checkmate. F takes g6 would have been followed with queen takes g6. And once you pick up this knight, well, it looks like you just picked up a knight and you're going to be a piece up. Well, surprise, surprise. Not so fast, because after rook to f1, now I'm threatening to take on f8. You're going to have to take back either with the king or with the rook. And after queen takes g7, that's going to be a checkmate. And there's absolutely no way you can defend in this position as black. Unfortunately for black, he would have been lost at this point. For example, if you go rook to g5, then I can actually go queen to f7. King takes h7, and now bishop to c2. And despite the fact that it looks like your king might be escaping, no, not so fast. Now I can give my queen as well. And after rook takes f8, that is a checkmate because, well, the king cannot go anywhere. So you're in trouble if you try to escape. On h6, after rook to f6, you're basically in the same situation, getting checkmated by the queen and the bishop. This bishop on c2 has a beautiful range, hitting up all the way to h7. So rook takes h7 would have been a big move for Magnus. Unfortunately, he missed his opportunity. He played this move, bishop to c2, a very wild position at this point. He only had 10 minutes on the clock. Definitely not an easy moment for the world champion. Queen to f2, this is the move that he missed. Not defending the rook on f5 necessarily, but more importantly, attacking the rook on h4. I believe this is the detail that escaped the world champion. The fact that the rook on h4 is under attack. It's an easy thing to miss. G takes f7, king takes f7, bishop takes f5, queen takes h4, and now the world champion took the very practical approach to force the draw. After rook to f1, king to g8, rook to f4, queen to e1, rook to f1, queen to e5, queen to h3. A very important move, setting up this attack on h7 and saying, okay, take my piece, but there's not going to be any way, if you take my piece, to get out of the repetition. And right now, Magnus Carlsen had 48 seconds on the clock. So this is move 31, still 9 moves to go until you reach the time control. Well, if you have to play on increment this position, this wild position, well, you might get in trouble very quickly. So that's why I think Magnus Carlsen, being the world champion and the experienced player that he is, he realizes the dangers of this position and he decides to go for the draw by repetition, because right now you're offering the knight on d5 and black can take it, of course. Nevertheless, right now white has two big threats. Bishop to e6, that's going to target the king and the queen on d5, but also queen takes h7 with a checkmate. Bishop takes h7 with a checkmate following as well. So the only thing black can do is give a check, rook to f1, give a check back, rook to f3, give a check back, rook to f1, and the players have agreed to a draw. 1-1 after the first two games of the mini-match. Tomorrow, July 24th, we will be going into the tie breaks, where Magnus Carlsen, well, he's going to have to survive, because otherwise we had so many surprises at this World Cup so far. Anish Giri is out, Fabiano Caruana is out, Shakhriyar Mamediyarov is out, Such a wild event, and right now we have Magnus Carlsen going into his first tie breaks of the World Cup. What will happen then? Only time will tell.